Imagine you buy a stolen laptop for a friend. Believe it or not, you could potentially walk away from that entirely scot-free.
Yeah, completely free.
But if you get cold feet and run away from a bank robbery that you helped plan, you are probably going straight to prison.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we are tearing apart the really messy, confusing math of how the legal system assigns blame. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It's completely fascinating. We generally expect the law to be as precise as math. Like you do a crime, you serve the time.
Right.
But when you actually look at the mechanics of legal blame, it is a very muddy landscape. It's full of strange exceptions.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We have a stack of excerpts from criminal law textbooks right here on the table.
Sounds too.
Very thick.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to understand the exact rules of accountability. We want to know how the law decides who is responsible, who is just a bystander, and when someone might be entirely excused from their actions.
Yeah, and the sources we're working from, they can be incredibly dense. Law textbooks love their Latin phrases and, centuries-old traditions, but the core concepts actually reveal a lot about how society views human behavior.
Right, and we're going to keep things completely accessible for you listening. We are going to stick to plain, simple English today. That is our special rule.
I love it.
No confusing legal jargon without an immediate translation. And we're going to make sure to frequently recap where we are so you never lose the thread.
That's a great approach.
Yeah.
Because to really understand this, we need to look at a crime as a timeline.
Okay.
There are things that happen before the crime, during the crime, and after the crime. And the law treats your involvement at each stage very differently.
So let's build a scenario, like a running hypothetical we can use to map all this out.
Sure.
Let's say I decide I want to rob a warehouse full of high-end electronics.
Yeah.
I'm the one who kicks in the door, bypasses the alarm, and walks out with the boxes.
Okay, so in legal terms, you are the principal. You're the main actor doing the physical criminal action.
The main doer.
Exactly. The old Latin term is the actus reus, but let's translate that immediately. It just means the bad act. You broke in, you stole the goods, you are the primary target for the law's blame.
But the sources also mention something called being, let me check the wording, constructively present.
Right.
What if I don't actually kick the door in myself? What if I don't know, hack the warehouse security system for my laptop while sitting in a coffee shop across town? And that unlocks the doors automatically for a crew.
You're still the principal.
Really? Even from the coffee shop?
Yeah. Constructively present simply means you are the main force causing the crime, even if your physical body is not at the scene. If you set a trap or deploy a computer virus and it does the dirty work while you're miles away, the law treats you exactly as if you were standing right there.
That makes perfect sense. But I probably can't rob a whole warehouse by myself. I need a crew, I need someone to drive the van and maybe someone to buy the lock-picking tools for me beforehand.
And the law calls these helpers accomplices.
Okay, accomplices.
Yes, but the law gets incredibly specific about what actually makes someone an accomplice. It's not just about being helpful. It is about your mental state.
How so?
Well, most places follow what the textbooks call the majority rule. Under this rule, to be an accomplice, you have to actually share the criminal intent. You must want the robbery to succeed.
Wait, let me push back on that.
Right.
What if I just sell someone a crowbar and they explicitly tell me they're going to use it to break into a warehouse?
Okay.
I don't care if they succeed or get caught. I really don't. I just want my $20 for the crowbar. Am I an accomplice?
Under the majority rule we just mentioned, selling that crowbar might not make you an accomplice.
Because I didn't care about the robbery.
Right, because your goal was just making a sale,
Right.
not helping a heist. However, the sources note there is a minority rule.
A minority rule.
Yeah, a few jurisdictions say that simply knowing the plan and providing help anyway is enough to make you an accomplice, even if you don't care about the outcome.
Oh, wow. So just knowing is enough in some places.
Exactly. But generally, the law wants to see that you had a stake in the actual criminal outcome.
Let's bring this back to the warehouse. Let's say my friend agrees to drive the getaway van. He waits outside with the engine running.
And he wants a cut of the money.
Yeah, he definitely wants a cut. So he shares the intent. He's an accomplice. But what happens if things go totally sideways?
How do you mean?
What if I get inside, the security guard startles me, and I accidentally knock over a space heater? The warehouse catches fire and burns to the ground. Is my getaway driver blamed for the fire too?
Absolutely.
Even though he just agreed to a robbery, he never agreed to arson.
It doesn't matter. The legal rule here is about natural and probable consequences.
Natural and probable consequences.
Right. When you agree to participate in a dangerous crime, like a burglary, the law says you're on the hook for any obvious, predictable accidents that happen as a result.
I mean, a fire's a pretty big accident.
But a physical struggle leading to a fire or an injury is a predictable risk of robbing a building at night. You help start the chain reaction, so you share the blame for where it ends up.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
So the getaway driver gets charged with the robbery and the fire.
Yep.
But let's look at a totally different angle. What if I use someone who has no idea what is going on?
Like who?
What if I hire a standard courier service to pick up the electronics from the back door of the warehouse, and I tell the driver, hey, I lost my keys, just grab the boxes out back?
Well, that changes the math entirely. The courier driver is doing the physical act of moving stolen goods, but they lack any criminal intent.
Because they're just doing their job.
Exactly. The textbook calls this an innocent agent.
An innocent agent, meaning they were tricked.
Right. The law requires a combination of a physical action and a criminal mindset. If you are genuinely tricked into delivering a stolen laptop or moving stolen goods, the law doesn't assign you any blame.
So the courier walks away scot-free.
Completely. All the criminal blame flows right past the courier and lands squarely on you, the person pulling the strings.
Okay, I noticed another weird exception in the sources, specifically about drug crimes. It seems like the law treats buying and selling differently.
It's a fascinating structural rule, actually. Some crimes require two people just to exist.
Like selling drugs.
Selling illegal drugs is a perfect example. You literally cannot have a sale without a buyer. But the law says the person buying the drugs is not an accomplice to the crime of drug distribution.
Wait, why not? They're literally handing over the money that makes the sale happen.
Because the law created separate categories. The seller is charged with distribution. The buyer is usually charged with possession.
Oh, I see.
The legal system structurally separates the two roles so that one side isn't automatically considered the accomplice of the other.
Okay, let's say I'm back to planning the warehouse heist. I recruit a friend to hack the cameras. We plan it for weeks. But the night before, he calls me panicked.
Getting cold feet.
Yeah. He says, I'm out. I can't do this. He hangs up. Can you just walk away?
Legally? No.
Really?
A simple change of heart is not enough to wipe away his involvement as an accomplice. The law calls the process of backing out withdrawal, and the rules are punishingly strict.
So what does he actually have to do to get his name cleared?
He has to completely undo whatever help he provided.
Like deleting the software.
Exactly. If he gave you the hacking software, he has to delete it or disable it. If he can't physically stop the crime from happening himself, he has to call the police in time for them to prevent it.
So just running away and covering his eyes doesn't relieve him of the blame.
Not at all. Once you put the gears in motion, you are responsible until you personally jam the gears to a halt.
Okay, let's pause right here. Let me make sure I'm tracking all of this, and let's do one of our quick recap moments for the timeline so far.
Sounds good. Let's synthesize it.
We've been looking at the time before and during the crime. The principal is the main actor doing the physical bad act.
Right.
An accomplice is someone who intentionally helps make the crime happen. If you are an accomplice, you share the blame for the main event, plus any predictable disasters that happen along the way.
Spot on.
And you can't just say, I quit, to avoid trouble. You have to actively stop the crime.
That is a perfect summary. You have the mechanics of the main event down.
Which means we need to advance our timeline. The warehouse has been robbed. The crime is totally over. Now we enter the cleanup phase.
The aftermath.
Yeah. This brings us to a new character the sources call the accessory after the fact.
Right. And this is where a lot of people totally misunderstand the law. An accessory after the fact is someone who knows a major crime was committed, and they take active steps to help the criminal hide and avoid capture.
Let's use our scenario. I successfully robbed the warehouse, but the cops are after me. I run to my sister's house. I tell her everything, and she lets me hide in her attic while the police search the neighborhood. Is she now guilty of robbing the warehouse?
No, she's not. And this is a massive distinction. As an accessory after the fact, she is completely shielded from the main crime. She didn't rob a warehouse.
So she's not a bank robber. Or a warehouse robber.
Right. Instead, she has committed a brand new, completely separate crime.
Like obstruction of justice or harboring a fugitive.
Precisely. To put it in simple English, she's punished for hiding you, not for stealing. The law recognizes that her intent wasn't to steal electronics. Her intent was to hide a criminal.
So her punishment is based on interfering with the police.
Which is generally a much lighter sentence than the actual robbery.
But let me ask you about the most common scenario. What if someone just watches it happen? Let's say a neighbor sees me loading the stolen boxes into my van.
Okay, a witness.
They know I'm stealing them, but they just go back inside, drink their tea, and never call the police. Are they a criminal?
Morally, society might judge them, but legally, no. The textbook is very clear on this. Simply failing to report a crime does not make you an accessory. In most jurisdictions, citizens just don't have a legal duty to volunteer information to the police.
So keeping your mouth shut is generally perfectly legal.
Yes, but there is a very sharp line you cannot cross.
What's the line?
If the police knock on that neighbor's door and ask, "Did you see which way the van went?" and the neighbor points north when they know you went south, now they are a criminal.
Because they lied.
Because they took an active step to hinder the investigation. The difference between legally keeping quiet and illegally hiding someone always comes down to taking an affirmative, active step to deceive the authorities.
The textbook does mention a couple of old, strange terms related to this. Misprision of felony and compounding a crime. What are those about?
Misprision of felony is largely an older concept. It's a slight exception to the keeping quiet is fine rule.
Okay.
It basically means you knew about a serious crime, you failed to report it, and you took some active step to conceal it. So it still requires that active step of hiding evidence.
And compounding a crime. What does that mean in simple English?
That one is much simpler. That's when you demand payment to keep quiet.
Oh, blackmail. Like if the neighbor says, give me a brand new laptop from that van, or I'm calling the cops.
Exactly. Taking money or goods in exchange for an agreement not to report a crime is a separate offense called compounding a crime. You're essentially turning someone else's crime into a business transaction for yourself.
Okay, let's do another quick recap moment for this cleanup phase.
For what?
If you help after the crime is fully completed, you are an accessory after the fact. You don't get blamed for the original robbery. You get charged with a new crime for obstructing the police.
Right.
Simply keeping quiet is generally legal, but taking active steps to hide the criminal, lying to the police, or taking hush money that crosses the line into criminal territory.
Exactly right. So up to this point, we've mapped out all the physical actions: who drove, who hid, who lied. But the law isn't just about what your body does.
What else is it about?
It's heavily focused on what your mind is capable of doing.
Which brings us to the most complex part of our deep dive. Legal excuses. What happens if the person doing the physical bad act has a mental state that is fundamentally broken?
We are stepping into the realm of the insanity defense, and the very first hurdle here is understanding that insanity is strictly a legal concept, not a medical one.
Why does the law separate itself from medicine like that? That seems counterintuitive.
Because a psychiatrist is looking to treat a patient, right? So they recognize a massive spectrum of mental health disorders. But the legal system is only trying to answer one binary question.
Which is?
At the exact moment the crime happened, was this person's connection to reality so broken that it is unfair to blame them?
The sources explicitly point out that sociopaths and psychopaths are excluded from the insanity defense. I think a lot of people would assume a psychopath is the definition of legally insane. Why are they excluded?
Because of how the law defines accountability. A sociopath might completely lack empathy. They might not feel any guilt or remorse, but they usually fully understand that what they are doing is against the rules of society.
So they know it's illegal, they just don't care.
Exactly. And the law says a lack of empathy is not an excuse. True legal insanity requires a disease or defect that shatters your basic comprehension of reality or your physical control.
But how on earth does a judge or jury actually measure that? You can't take an x-ray of someone's thoughts.
Yeah.
How do we prove what was happening inside someone's head months after the fact?
It is incredibly difficult, and the courts have argued about this for centuries. The textbook outlines 4 different tests that the legal system has developed over time to try and measure this.
Let's walk through how those tests evolved, because the history really helps explain the logic. The first one is called the Knighton test.
Right. This goes all the way back to England in the 1840s. Knighton is often called the right from wrong test.
The right from wrong test.
It asks a simple question. Because of a mind disease, did the person completely fail to understand what they were doing? Or, if they did know what they were doing, did they fail to understand that it was wrong?
So if someone genuinely hallucinates that they are chopping wood, but they're actually harming a person, they'd pass the Knighton test. Their brains simply couldn't process the reality of their actions.
Precisely. But over time, lawyers realized that Knighton was too narrow. What if you do know something is wrong, but you physically cannot stop yourself? That led to the second standard, the irresistible impulse test.
That sounds like a loss of self-control.
Exactly. This test recognizes that a mental illness might leave your logic intact but destroy your impulse control. You know stealing the car is wrong, you know you will go to jail, but the psychological compulsion is so overpowering that you literally cannot stop your hands from taking the keys.
So the law eventually acknowledged that knowing right from wrong isn't enough if the steering wheel of your brain is completely broken.
That's a great way to put it.
What about the third test? The sources call it the Durham rule.
The Durham rule was a mid-20th century experiment, and it's very broad. It's essentially a but-for test, it asks. Would this crime have happened if the person didn't have this mental illness?
Meaning, if the crime was a direct product of the disease, they are excused.
Yep.
That seems like it would excuse almost everything if you had a diagnosis.
It did, which is why almost no courts use it anymore. It was just too broad. That failure led to the fourth and final test, which is what most modern jurisdictions use, the Model Penal Code test.
Or the MPC. And reading the source, the MPC looks like a mashup of the first two tests.
It really is.
It says you're excused if, due to mental disease, you lack the real power to either understand your conduct is wrong or to control your own body.
Exactly. It combines the knowing right from wrong standard with the loss of self-control standard, but it softens them slightly. You don't have to be totally disconnected from reality. You just have to lack real power over your actions. It's a more realistic view of how mental illness actually affects people.
But let's talk about the courtroom reality. If I'm accused of a crime, do I just stand up and declare I was legally insane and the prosecution has to prove I wasn't?
Usually, no. Insanity is what's called an affirmative defense. That means the burden of proof is usually on you, the accused person. You have to bring in the doctors and the medical records to prove your mind was broken.
Okay, so I have to prove it.
Generally. However, the textbook notes that in a few places, if the accused shows just a little bit of evidence of mental illness, the burden flips. Then the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person was perfectly sane.
Which must be very hard for prosecutors to do.
Incredibly hard.
Let me do a quick recap moment here so we have it locked in. Insanity is a strict legal standard, not a medical one.
Right.
It means a severe mind disease stopped you from knowing your actions were wrong or stopped you from physically controlling yourself. A lack of guilt isn't enough, and it's usually up to the accused to prove they meet this high bar.
You're tracking it perfectly.
Okay, so we've covered a mental state broken by disease. But what if the mind is blocked by something else?
Like what?
What if it's blocked by chemicals like drugs or alcohol? Or what if the mind is just young and undeveloped?
Now we're looking at the defenses of intoxication and immaturity. And with intoxication, the law draws a massive, heavy line between involuntary and voluntary.
Let's start with involuntary, which seems pretty straightforward. This means someone slipped something into my drink, or I was physically forced to consume a drug.
Or perhaps you took a perfectly normal prescription medication from your doctor and you had a completely unpredictable, severe allergic reaction that caused hallucinations. The key is that you did not choose to alter your mental state.
And the law treats that pretty kindly, right?
It does. Involuntary intoxication is treated almost exactly like temporary insanity. Because you didn't choose to lose your grip on reality, the law will generally excuse you from almost any crime you commit while in that state.
But what if I do choose it? This is the voluntary intoxication part.
Yeah.
Let's say I go to a bar. I willingly drink 10 shots of tequila, and I become completely blackout drunk.
Okay.
I do something terrible. Can I just tell the judge, hey, I had no idea what I was doing. The alcohol made me do it?
You'd think a total blackout would excuse you, but no. The law is incredibly strict here because society doesn't want to give people a free pass just for getting drunk.
That makes sense.
Voluntary drinking is only an excuse for a very narrow category of crimes. Crimes where you needed a very specific plan.
Okay, we need to break that down. Why does the law care what kind of crime it is?
Let's look at murder. Premeditated murder requires a very specific plan. You have to sit down, form a complex scheme, and deliberately execute it. If you are blindly, violently drunk, your lawyer can argue that your brain was chemically incapable of forming that kind of sophisticated plan.
So I get away with murder.
Absolutely not. And this is the catch. If the jury believes you were too drunk to plan a premeditated murder, you're still going to be convicted of a lesser crime, like manslaughter.
Because manslaughter doesn't require a plan.
Exactly. It just requires you to be wildly reckless. And the law says that choosing to get blackout drunk is in itself a reckless act. Therefore, Being drunk is never an excuse for a crime based on recklessness.
That makes profound logical sense. You can't use your own reckless drinking as an excuse for reckless behavior.
Hmm.
What about the classic liquid courage scenario?
Oh, this is a good one.
Let's say I'm planning to rob that warehouse, but I'm terrified. So I drink half a bottle of whiskey just to get my hands to stop shaking before I break in.
Your intoxication excuse is completely thrown out.
Really?
Yeah. If you form the criminal plan while sober and then use chemicals to numb your nerves or gain courage, the law treats you as if you committed the crime completely sober. The bad mind was already there.
Fascinating.
Mhm.
All right, let's look at the last excuse.
Sure.
Age. The sources talk about immaturity. If a 6-year-old child finds a loaded gun and shoots a window, are they a criminal?
No. Historically, under the old rules, there were very rigid age brackets. A child under the age of 7 was considered legally incapable of committing a crime.
They just couldn't do it.
Right. The law literally said their brains couldn't formulate a bad mind.
And as they get older,
Yeah. Between the ages of 7 and 14, they guessed you couldn't commit a crime, but the prosecutor was allowed to bring in evidence to prove the child actually understood how bad their actions were.
is that still how it works?
Modern laws usually just set a hard age line, usually somewhere between 11 and 14. Below that line, you cannot be a criminal. Above that line, you're usually routed into a separate juvenile system.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of legal ground today. It's time for our grand recap moment. Let's summarize everything we've unpacked about the rules of blame for you listening.
Let's pull the whole timeline together.
We started with the physical acts. The main actor doing the deed is the principal. The people who intentionally help beforehand or during are the accomplices.
And they share the blame for the crime and its predictable accidents.
Then we looked at the cleanup. Anyone who actively helps hide the criminal after the fact is an accessory after the fact, and that is punished as a completely separate crime of obstruction.
Right, rather than the main offense.
Next, we moved into the mind. True legal insanity is a high bar where a mind disease breaks your ability to know right from wrong or your ability to control your body.
And finally, we looked at other excuses. Involuntary intoxication can excuse you, but choosing to get drunk only excuses you from crimes that require careful, specific planning.
And if you're simply too young, the law recognizes your brain isn't ready for criminal accountability.
That's the entire landscape.
So we've mapped out exactly who gets the blame and who gets excused. To put the final polish on this, the textbook explains how the legal system uses all of these rules to sort people into 2 major buckets.
Felonies and misdemeanors.
Right.
Ultimately, all of this analysis is just a sorting mechanism for punishment. A felony is a major offense. If you end up in this bucket, you're facing massive fines, more than a year in prison, or even the death penalty.
And a misdemeanor.
That's a lesser offense, capped at a maximum of 1 year in a local jail, or just a fine. Everything we discussed today is just the law's way of figuring out which bucket you belong in.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought to leave you with. We noted at the beginning how the law desperately wants to be like math. It relies heavily on these neat, tidy boxes: intent, self-control, knowing right from wrong.
Right, it's a system built on hundreds of years of philosophy about free will.
But modern brain science is advancing at lightning speed.
Yes.
We can now look at how our brains actually fire in real time.
The scans are incredible.
Exactly. What happens if neuroscience eventually proves that the law's neat little boxes don't actually exist?
That is the crisis on the horizon for criminal law.
If a brain scan shows that we all struggle with impulse control, and that our choices are largely just chemical reactions, will we have to throw away these centuries-old rules?
It's a profound question.
If the biological reality of the brain doesn't match the legal math, will the entire definition of blame have to be completely rewritten?
As the science gets clearer, the legal waters might actually get much muddier.
It's definitely something to chew on the next time you hear a true crime story or read a headline about a trial. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of legal blame. Keep asking questions and keep looking beneath the surface.